As myth is concerned, the word is explained in a well-known dictionary as the traditional narrative, usually involving supernatural or fancied persons and embodying popular ideas on natural or social phenomena. One would like to perhaps shorten the definition by saying that myth relates to unhistorical facts that are popularly held or sought to be popularly held. By its very definition, myth is not history. That is to say, it does not offer facts that are true, but facts that are believed or sought to be so spread as to be accepted in popular perceptions. By its very definition, the extent to which mythology prevails in a society perhaps indicates its backwardness. Because any society must frame its objectives based on the correct memory of the past, the correct memory of what has happened. Just as an individual, if he has a totally false memory of his own past actions and past experiences, would be almost endangering himself and others. So also a nation or a country with a wrong appraisal of its past, which of course the myth applies, the word myth applies, would be endangering its present and future conduct. Therefore, I think it's a very wise step to resist myth making. It would be a very wise step for any nation to resist myth making and to establish a correct memory of its past through what should be accurate history. In fact, history is the direct opposite of mythology. This science itself has developed over perhaps 2.5 millennia in different civilizations, notably, as far as we know, for the first time in the Greek and Chinese civilizations, where history established itself with Herodotus, particularly in Greece in 6th century BC, as an established branch of knowledge.
मुझे बहुत आता, बहुत काटा पीटी की है प्लीज
History is generally a narrative of the past, and in pursuit of it, you have to establish two particular ways in recording the past. First, accuracy, and second, scope. Accuracy is concerned, among modern historians, and of course I take 19th century to belong to the modern period.
नहीं ऐसे नहीं.
Von Ranke, the German historian, established rules for criticism of sources, distinguishing between primary and secondary sources, the primary sources being those closest to the time and event, and therefore establishing norms for dealing with sources from which we obtain facts. Subsequently, Louis Namier, who died in 1960, particularly emphasized the use of, as far as possible, private documents, which would enable us to go beyond public proclamations and investigate private and personal interests. In other words, sources have to be studied and judged for their accuracy, as also the interests of the recorder, the objectives of the recorder. At the same time as the critical spirit in judging historical sources has been particularly developed, there has been a larger and larger scope of historiography. It's very pertinent that today is Women's Day because, for example, women's history now occupies a larger amount of attention of historians, or should so occupy, than was the case only 30 or 40 years ago. And much earlier, of course, with Adam Smith, but especially Karl Marx, economic and social history, or the history of what might be called the masses and their material being, that has been included in the scope of history. And so also environment, ecological history. What has often been called comprehensive history. So the scope of history has been greatly enlarged, while the methodology for establishing accurate assessment of facts, and of course the weightage to be given to various kinds of facts, has been increasingly sharp. In other words, mythology, false but popular narratives have retreated, and factual narratives and historical narratives, both as far as accuracy is concerned, and second as far as scope is concerned, taking into consideration the events and developments affecting the large masses of people, the largest masses of people possible, that have all been improved throughout the world. As against this, you have myth building often simultaneously takes place to various degrees, which a particular vision of the past, a particular depiction of the past is encouraged, not because it is true, not because it is, one might say, historically established, but because it will support one's own political or other objectives. And therefore, myth building, which was previously confined to religions, sometimes to tribal and traditional community feelings, now tends to become a political rhetoric. It has been political weapon for quite some time. As we used to say 50 or 60 years ago, the communal interpretations of history on both Hindu and Muslim sides indulged in quite a lot of myth building, which could be then countered only by history. Today, we are seeing in India a very massive amount of myth building, which is being encouraged from official sources. And it is this kind of myth building to which I propose to concern myself mainly. Most cultures in the world, especially when their literary history begins early, the Chinese, Greek, Roman, Indian, Iranian, they had stories and tales, and narratives which were either based on religion or is on China as tradition, literary tradition, which presented depictions of the past involving gods, goddesses, demons, and even monotheistic tradition from beginning with Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They had visions of the past which had nothing to do with, little to do with reality, but were strongly believed in for religious reasons or for cultural reasons, and so on. So mythologies were created. And sometimes persons actually sincerely believed in that mythology. For example, in Islamic cultures like Arab and Iranian, world histories or general histories included descriptions of the biblical prophets as if they were history. There was hardly any political intent involved. Certainly you could say that perhaps religious purpose was involved. But that is what is different now from modern times. Mythology is now given the political purpose. And I should begin now with the race theory, which had early development because of the success of West European colonialism, and involved partly a belief in Christian superiority and partly a belief in racial superiority. That racial superiority was partly influenced and partly modified by the theory of Indo-European race. It being found in the late 18th century that several languages, Sanskrit, Persian, Greek, Latin, German, Germanic languages, including English, had many traits in common. which other languages like Chinese or Arabic did not share. And therefore arose the concept of Indo-European language family. And therefore a belief that if there was a common parent language, there must have been a common race of origin. For a particular subfamily of the Indo-European languages, the word Aryan was coined from the word Arya in Sanskrit, going back to early Sanskrit texts, and air in the Iranian. In both languages, the word did not mean race, it meant respectable people. You have the word Iran from there. And you have the word Arya for the twice born castes. That is to say, Shudras and the untouchables were not Aryas, they were not respectable. But in English usage, Aryan became an indication of race. It is purely European appropriation of Indo-European, of Aryan, relating only to the Indo-Iranic language speakers. But it was the Nazis, Hitler and his fellow Nazis, who made the Aryan word apply to Germans, who were in fact not Aryans at all. They belonged to the larger Indo-European family, the Germanic subfamily of Indo-European family. And even use swastika, though turning it in the direct direction, which they took from ancient, from Indian tradition. And therefore promoted the Aryan race theory, making Germany the original Aryan home. Now, it has happened that this theory has come back to us from Germany. And the present UGC syllabus announces that there were Aryans did not come from outside. India is the original home of the Aryans. As if we have made Arya a word specifying race, not respectability. And of course, excluding Shudras and so on. This is a very perverse development of mythology. Because to think that race has anything to do with human endeavors is really perverse and unnecessarily introduces into India a division between Aryans and Dravidians, which, by the way, genetically there doesn't seem to be any. It's all linguistic. So to turn a language family into a genetic family, which geneticists reject, is perverse mythology and only promotes a false kind of national patriotism, which turns into a kind of racial patriotism. The second implication of this is, of course, that every great achievement must be related to Aryans in India. And therefore, it becomes very important for present propagandists of mythology that the Indus civilization should be denied to Dravidians or any other non-Aryan race. Now, this is as far as historical facts are concerned, archaeology is concerned, extremely dubious procedure. Indus civilization is dated. Carbon dating and all other kinds of dating possible between 2600 BC and 1800 BC. And as far as the earliest Vedic ancient text Rig Veda is concerned, on linguistic grounds, particularly because of its very close kinship with the Avesta, the Iranian text, which could be keyed to with Mesopotamian chronology. It is just impossible to date the Rig Veda before 1500 BC. There are other indications also that Indus civilization is earlier than Rig Veda, because Indus civilization, for instance, doesn't have a horse. It is only, all other remains can be attributed to wild horses, which are very few. And there is no horse portrayed on the seals, in the seals, in spite of the numerous animals otherwise represented. So it's a pre-horse civilization. Its dating also is pre-Vedic. Now all this is brushed aside. And Indus civilization is being called Saraswati Sindhu civilization. Previously, the official name was Harappan civilization in India, Indian archaeological survey. But now I see that officially it is increasingly becoming Saraswati Sindhu or Sindhu Saraswati civilization. As if because Saraswati and Sindhu are mentioned in the Rig Veda by those names, by the very name, you can convert Indus civilization into an Aryan one. This is particularly perverse because if there is any association with any Indian language, it is with the Proto-Dravidian because of the profusion of the fish signs and the position of the arrow signs in the Indus. These two important indicators suggest a Proto-Dravidian affiliation. But as I've said, the particular perversity lies in seeing Indian past culture as essentially an Aryan culture, and therefore rejecting the Dravidian contribution to our culture. Apart from this kind of racialism, which is totally opposed to all serious historiography, and I'm sure that myth makers in other cultures would probably take care to eschew this kind of racialism, particularly because of the Nazi experience. Apart from that, there is another construction of mythology, and that is about both the chronology and the cultural achievements and scientific achievements of early Aryan, so-called Aryan civilization, apart from this appropriation or misappropriation of Indus culture. When the present Prime Minister had won the earlier elections, very soon after his taking office, he informed the Indian public that we in ancient India knew plastic surgery in distant past because of what we did to Lord Ganesha, fitting an elephant's head into a human body. It mattered that such a fantastic statement should be made by the Prime Minister of the second most populous country in the world. But ever since then, all kinds of perverse claims have been made. If you look at very past issues of the journal history, Indian History of Science, Indian Journal of History of Science, you will see all kinds of articles trying to establish the dates of the Rig Veda at 8000 BC or other texts, earlier time, Brahmanas and Upanishads, very early times, to all kinds of contrived astronomical dating, and then attributing all kinds of scientific achievements to texts that were dated earlier so as to be earlier than other texts throughout the world. B.B. Lal, who was once Director General of Archaeology, I remember him declaring that a particular Shatapatha Brahmana was to be dated 4400 BC, just because of a particular reference to an astronomical situation, and so on. Vatankar, the RSS archaeologist, also insisted that Rig Veda was as old as 8000 BC. So first there is this chronological fantasy, and then the achievements. As I've said, plastic surgery, astronomical achievements by just dating everything early, the text as early as possible. And where texts are not available, interpreting particular passages and then dating them early. So this kind of thing has proceeded to a considerable extent. And when the textbooks of ancient India by Makhan Lal was published during the earlier RSS, the BJP regime, 1999 to 2004, then all dates were pushed to 5000 BC. Rig Veda was put, if I remember right, in 5000 BC, and so Indus civilization was made into a Vedic civilization, although Rig Veda has no perception of tongues. It is this kind of mythology that has led to the acceptance in the UGC syllabus of the Ramayana and Mahabharata as historical texts. There is an actual statement there in the syllabus that the historicity of the epics has to be studied. And then, of course, flying chariots would make us the first inventors of the aeroplane. DC Sarkar, I trust he was putting it as a joke, said in his text of Ramayana that after all, flying chariots were invented not by Aryas but by Rakshasas. So we can hardly claim flying chariots as an Aryan discovery. But by making Ramayana and Mahabharata as historical texts, we are actually creating another source of mythology and trying to turn it into history. This kind of myth-making continues also into medieval India. There's, for instance, a depreciation of Buddhism in Prague. And a particular play with the caste system. First of all, the entire business of the rise of castes and its influence on society is brushed under the carpet in the UGC syllabus. There's no reference to the caste system in ancient India. The first reference to caste system comes under medieval India, as if it was the inclusion of the Muslims, which forced Hindus to adopt the caste system. I wonder if this argument would be good. The history of so important a social organization and its spread is a very important element of ancient Indian history. Where did the caste system arise? The jati system, the endogamy, the detailed subcastes, their classification into four varnas. How did it start? How did it become? How did it assume all these details? From which regions did it spread? Particularly the endogamy system, the system of outcasts, the class of outcasts, the transfer of the majority of people from the varna of Vaishyas to the varna of Shudras. All these are very important questions, and much has been written on it. R.S. Sharma's classic Shudras in ancient India, for instance. And there are many questions also. Why does the caste not appear in Ashoka's Dharma? Why is there no reference at all to the caste system or to following the caste system? What was the role of Buddhism? Does Buddhism, by insistence on transmigration of souls, which in the Upanishads is attributed to Kshatriyas and therefore by inference to Mahavira and Gautama Buddha, where it provided a new justification for the Varna system, caste system. All these are very important elements of ancient Indian history. And these are totally ignored in the UGC. And therefore, you might put statues of Ambedkar, but actually you are driving out Ambedkar from ancient Indian history by creating a false kind of history of Indian society. There's a very interesting, but I think perverse interest in the origins of the Rajputs. I think it's an interesting question. How did the term Rajputra originate? But Rajputs are now sought to be viewed as the great defenders of Hinduism And therefore, how they originated becomes very important for Indian historiography, if you can see from the UGC syllabus. Professor Dashrath Sharma had long ago argued that Rajputs were actually Brahmins who, because the Kshatriyas had failed to fight the Muslims, turned into Rajputs themselves, into Kshatriyas themselves, and therefore became Rajputs. So Professor Dashrath Sharma was a serious historian. Very few historians treated this as serious argument. But it is now very clear, I think, from a particular influence in a record of Arab conquest of Sindh, 712, in which the cavalry, 4,000 or 5,000 cavalry surrounding Dahar, the Sindh ruler, and the final battle, are described as Ibn al-Muluk, an Arabic translation exactly of Rajput. So these were cavalrymen, lancers riding horses, which had replaced increasingly the chariots. By Harsha's time, the chariots had disappeared and the cavalry had come. So Rajaputras were actually the new cavalry soldiers, and they are gradually found all over northern India and partly in the Deccan. And their castes and subcastes develop over time. But they are essentially horsemen. And there were also other castes, Gurjaras, for instance, the rulers were Gurjaras, and ordinary peasants were also Gurjaras. They had a large empire in northern India. So there were others also who were important, not only Rajaputras, but as I say, there is a special position being attributed to the Rajaputras, and in the UG syllabus, that particular period of say 700 to 1200 is given as much importance as the further period from 1200 to 1700, the so-called Muslim period. Now, I shall come now to the next myth making, which again is fairly old, both from the side of Muslim communalism and Hindu communalism, as if the period of 1200 to 1700, most rulers were Muslims, was a period of foreign rule, or Muslim rule, as if all Muslims belong to the ruling class. Now, first of all, it is true that Islam came from outside, or previous religious systems in India, Brahmanism, Buddhism, Jainism, that arisen out of India. Islam came from Arabia. But apart from Sindh, Arabs did not come to India. Those who came to India first from abroad, but from Iran and from Central Asia, after the initial Arab rule in Sindh, which was established very early. Simple. And they settled in India, and then of course there were large numbers of conversions, so that most Muslims, of course, have the same genetic character as their Hindu compatriots. genetically, no particular difference has been established between Muslims and Hindus, so far as I know. A judge of the Allahabad High Court, delivering a long judgment on the Babri Masjid case, told us that Indian Muslim rulers sent Indian wealth abroad all the time. I don't know where Justice Sudhir Agarwal studied history, but I don't remember any case of any Indian Muslim ruler sending large amount of wealth abroad to his compatriots, except of course certain charitable grants made for Hajj pilgrims, and that also to Indians going for Hajj. This is a confusion between wealth transfer that took place under British imperialism, often amounting to 4 or 5% of India's gross national income, which would be even more than what a backward society could produce additionally, apart from meeting its subsistence costs. Confusing that transfer of wealth, which Darabhai Nauroji and other early Indian nationalists spoke, and which further research has even enlarged on what they have said. Confusing this with Muslim rulers who might in origin have come from Central Asia, and some of them didn't. For instance, Khaljis belong to Afghanistan and had little to do with, and Afghanistan was often regarded as actually part of India. Abul Fazl said Kabul and Kandahar are the gateways of India. So, given this particular position to treat Afghanistan as a Afghan area is now, of course, a separate country, but at that time it was hardly so regarded. And then again, they didn't go back. They never sent any money back, and so on. Take the Mughals. After Humayun, every Mughal emperor was born in India, and from Akbar onwards, they sent no tribute abroad. They employed Indians, both Muslims and Rajputs, and also descendants of foreign migrants. And therefore, to call them foreigners, as our Prime Minister did immediately after taking office, talking of 1,000 years of foreign rule, is absurd. Whatever they gained, sultans or rajas, from the poor in India, by taxation from the peasants, and because of India from taxation, they spent within India. And therefore, to that extent, not only exploited India, but also promoted its economy. As everyone did. And if you look at histories of other countries like England, Normans were actually French, Norwegians were French, and even their present dynasty is of Germanic origin. Can you say therefore that England has been ruled by foreigners all the time? So this kind of application of modern national boundaries to pre-modern history is absurd. Colonialism is different. It is a real extraction of economic wealth from the colony to the metropolitan country, which did not occur in earlier politics. And this kind of denunciation leads to absurdities. I will give one example. Curzon says in his reminiscences once that once he was visited by Mr. Surendranath Banerjee when he was vice. Then Surendranath Banerjee asked him to do something which he doesn't mention, but some administrative measure or some concession to some friend of Banerjee, which Curzon immediately did. And so Surendranath Banerjee was very pleased and said to Curzon that after Ashoka and Akbar, you are the best ruler. And Curzon was very pleased with the comparison between Ashoka and Akbar. There was this kind of feeling that these were the two rulers who left something behind, some particular principle or moral principle behind. But today, in the UGC syllabus, Akbar is excluded from the syllabus. He's not worth even mentioning. And by the way, Ashok is only just mentioned Ashok. There is no description in the UGC syllabus of the fact that he brought writing for the first time to the country, Northern India at least. And of course, no mention that Tamil Brahmi and early Brahmi script has been found in South India and Sri Lanka earlier. So even the importance of writing is forgotten because then it would be attributed to Ashoka and Buddhism. But coming back to Akbar, Akbar is excluded totally. And therefore, the culture of the time, the architecture of the time, even the technological developments of the time are all excluded. So exclusion is also a part of mythology. They are not parts of history at all. The fact that spinning wheel came into medieval India in the 14th century, Charkha, the symbol of India's national movement, is not even worth mentioning. So all aspects of what is regarded modern historiography as essential, remains history, technology, social structure, and so forth. Or as far as ancient India is concerned, excluded. As far as medieval India is concerned, it is assumed that caste system came for the first time in medieval India under the Muslims. As for example, used to be said that Sati came because of the Muslims, although now in Sati inscriptions have been found much earlier. And in fact, in the Mughal Empire, Sati was restricted. Then you have mythology being built for modern India, which I will, because I've taken so much time, I will be brief about that, which is to put both Gandhiji and Jawaharlal Nehru in the shade, to put the main national movement in the shade. Okay. And to try to make V.D. Savarkar as a great national figure. Despite what he did from 1920 onwards, his total abstention from any criticism of British, his declaration that monumental reforms were end, and his declaration of Hindutva, making Muslims the main enemy, not the English. His two-nation theory, perversely preceding the Lahore resolution of the Muslim League. Despite this, he's promoted as the great nationalist. And continuous effort is made to run down the great national figures and to misinterpret Patel. If misinterpreting Indian history, giving wrong facts and wrong emphasis is not only distortion of history, but in my view, this is also myth building, creating heroes or denouncing heroic figures, on the other hand, for your own political benefit today, partisan benefit. So the whole history of the national movement is sought to be misinterpreted. And our national leaders, who belong mainly to the Congress, and even when they were socialists or communists, they belonged to the Congress in the 1930s and early 40s. They are being ruled out of history. They are nowhere in the picture. And Sardar Patel glorified, despite the fact that he personally wholly rejected the idea of a Hindu state in his correspondence with G.D. Bill. He clearly stigmatized the RSS for its crimes against Muslims. And therefore, totally misrepresenting historical figures for their own political advantage. And this kind of myth building has continued for the period after 47. Umpteen speakers today speak as if nothing happened after 47, and only now something is being done. And unfortunately, if these facts are not recited, people will believe in this myth. I want to recall the Constitution, the very fact of adult suffrage, the very first step after independence. Our democracy was established. Our parliamentary democracy was established. Nobody believed that immediately an adult suffrage all over India would be possible. That was shown and done in 1952. Secondly, much is said about civil code and reform. Well, Hindu civil code was totally reformed in 1955-56 and subsequently Dowry Act. And then, in which for all matters practically, women were made equal to men in inheritance and so on. And in Hindu joint family, this measure was also taken in 1900 to 2005, not under a BJP government, but under a non-BJP government. And then abolition of landlordism, zamindari throughout the country, and land reform, which today, if the peasants have lands, all of this they got after independence. Zamindari Abolition Act and so on, and the most radical acts in Kerala and West Bengal legislation later on. And then land sealing, by which the so-called untouchables got land, the Dalits got land. All that took place after independence. The construction of heavy industry in India, particularly under second five-year plan, which I would like to remind G.D. Birla lauded. All this construction of heavy industry belongs to that period, and then of course institutes of technology and so on. And the policy of independence and non-alignment, all was the creation of that period. So myth building also involves deletion of history. And that we see in the case of national movement, in the case of post-independent India. It is therefore the task of historians not only to whitewash everything, but to present the actual facts, both the weaknesses of the past and the achievements of the past, both on an accurate basis and a larger scope of history, as I've said, that we have now established, and probably the scope will become larger and larger as fresh generations. Well, thank you very much.